In the last decade, over 20 African countries have signed secretive agreements with foreign powers, effectively leasing their natural resources and strategic territories for pennies on the dollar. The most striking example is the 2018 deal between the Democratic Republic of Congo and China, where the latter secured access to an estimated 10 million tons of copper and 600,000 tons of cobalt in exchange for a mere $3.5 billion in infrastructure investments. This is not just a story about exploitative trade agreements. It's about the systematic erosion of African sovereignty, where the continent's rich resources are being silently carved up among superpowers without the knowledge or consent of its people. The consequences of these agreements are already being felt across the continent. In Ethiopia, for instance, the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has been fueled by Chinese loans and expertise, but at the cost of Ethiopia's long-term economic independence. Similarly, in South Africa, the government's attempts to nationalize its mining industry have been met with fierce resistance from Western corporations, who claim that such moves would violate international trade agreements. Meanwhile, ordinary Africans are left to suffer the environmental and social fallout of these extractive industries, from polluted water sources to displacement from their ancestral lands. The numbers are stark. According to a recent report, over 50,000 people in the Niger Delta have been affected by oil spills and pollution, with the local economy losing an estimated $10 billion annually. What's really happening here is a new scramble for Africa, where superpowers are using a combination of economic coercion, diplomatic pressure, and strategic manipulation to secure control over the continent's resources, markets, and territories. China, in particular, has been at the forefront of this push, using its vast economic resources and infrastructure projects to win the hearts and minds of African leaders. But the United States, Europe, and other players are not far behind, each seeking to exert their influence and protect their interests in the region. The mechanisms of this scramble are complex and multifaceted, involving not just trade agreements and investment deals, but also security pacts, cultural exchanges, and even social media campaigns. For example, China's Belt and Road Initiative has been touted as a panacea for Africa's infrastructure woes. But in reality, it's a cleverly disguised debt trap that locks countries into decades of Chinese dominance. The history of this scramble is long and complex, dating back to the colonial era when European powers first partitioned the continent among themselves. But what's different this time around is the sheer scale and sophistication of the efforts involved. Today, superpowers are using advanced technologies, from drones and satellites to artificial intelligence and cyber warfare, to exert their influence and control over African territories. They're also leveraging international institutions and norms to legitimize their actions, whether it's through the United Nations or the African Union. The result is a continent that's increasingly fragmented and vulnerable, with its people caught in the middle of a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. As the scramble for Africa intensifies, the stakes are growing higher by the day. The continent is home to over 1.3 billion people, with a combined GDP of over $2 trillion. It's also rich in natural resources, from oil and gas to minerals and metals. But beyond these economic interests, Africa is also a strategic location, with many of its countries serving as critical transit points for global trade and commerce. The Red Sea, for instance, is a vital waterway that connects Europe and Asia, with over 10% of global trade passing through it every year. Whoever controls Africa, therefore, controls a significant chunk of the global economy. So what comes next in this scramble for Africa? One thing is certain: the competition for influence and resources will only grow fiercer in the coming years. We can expect to see more diplomatic tensions, more economic arm-twisting, and more strategic posturing as superpowers jockey for position on the continent. But we can also expect to see more pushback from African countries and communities, who are increasingly aware of the dangers of external manipulation and exploitation. From the streets of Johannesburg to the villages of Kinshasa, Africans are organizing and mobilizing to reclaim their sovereignty and their future. As the situation unfolds, it's essential to recognize that the scramble for Africa is not just a distant phenomenon. It has real and immediate consequences for people around the world. Whether you're a consumer of African resources, a business investor in the continent, or simply a global citizen concerned about justice and equality, you have a stake in this story. The question is, what will you do about it? The truth is, the future of Africa is not just a matter for Africans. It's a global concern that requires a global response. As we watch the superpowers carve up the continent, we must also recognize the agency and autonomy of African people, who are not just passive victims of external forces, but active agents of change and transformation. In the end, it's not about who wins or loses in the scramble for Africa. It's about what kind of future we want to build together for the benefit of all. The real story of Africa's division is one of silence, erasure, and complicity, where the voices and interests of African people are consistently marginalized and ignored.